Okay, my friends, here we go. This is Kinesiology 230. This is chapter number 3. We are in module 2. You can tell because my slides are orange and I'm wearing an orange shirt. We're going to be talking in chapter 3 about bioenergetics, and we're talking specifically in this presentation, just kind of like the introduction of this chapter, but we're going to talk a little bit about terminology and a little bit about ATP. And I have to give you full disclosure and disclaimer. This will be easily one of the, if not the most complex thing we're going to talk about in this class for the entire term. So, you may have to shut me off once in a while and come back and go back to the videos, but there's a lot to parse through and it's a lot of technical kind of jargon. I'll do my best to keep it nice and simple and try to keep it on task for what is asked on exams and what is asked on the NSCA exam, as well as our quizzes and materials for our class. And so the basic overview in chapter 3, what we're looking to do is understand some terminology of bioenergetics and metabolism related to exercise and training. It's kind of the key part. We talk about like different energy systems in the body. And the key component to this, and the thing that really drives it in terms of the energy side of the equation, is adenosine triphosphate. And you'll hear me say ATP about 1,000 times in the next 10 or 12 presentations. And the energy systems themselves rely on different mechanisms, whether it's oxidative, glycolytic, or it is phosphagen systems. And depending upon the sport, depending upon the activity, depending on what the person is doing, depending on what you have your client doing, will dictate what is the predominant driver. Now, it's not like you should turn you turn 2 of the systems off and 1 of them stays on, but you'll have this kind of ebb and flow that happens between these different energy systems in the body. We'll talk more about that. And you have different substrates. Now, I hope that you take a little bit of time to kind of be intellectually curious. We're in a 200 level course here, but I mean, there's definitely a few rabbit holes you can jump down and get into like 400 and 500 level stuff pretty easily. And I'll kind of point out areas of opportunity. If you so choose, you can kind of jump in and start learning a little bit more. But really what we're talking about is how do you figure out what a particular sport demands in terms of energy system? How do you train for that energy system? And then how do you actually best prepare the human organism for that energy system? It's basically gets back to what we were talking about before. When you have sport-specific demands, require sport-specific training to get a sport-specific result. Now, the terminology that we have to hit on the front end is bioenergetics. It's the flow of energy in a biological system, and it primarily concerns the conversion of food or carbohydrate, protein, and fat molecules that contain chemical energy. Now, these are all processed differently within the body, and they're processed in different ways to allow us to get to the end result, which is adenosine triphosphate. Catabolic. It's a process of breaking down molecules into smaller molecules, and it's accompanied by a release of energy, whereas anabolic is the exact opposite of that. It's a process of building up larger molecules, like you're taking small building blocks and making a big building block. And it's the exact opposite as catabolic. Metabolism is a sum of all catabolic and anabolic reactions in the body, both. Taking stuff apart to release energy or putting stuff back together. And adenosine triphosphate is the energy obtained from catabolic reactions, and it's used to drive anabolic reactions through an intermediate molecule, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And ATP is it. That's the main thing that really drives muscle contraction and be able to have, just in general, have our bodies function. Now, adenosine diphosphate, if you look at those two, triphosphate, tri like tricycle, 3, diphosphate, di like that means 2. So it's still the same adenosine, and it still has phosphate involved, but one of them has 3 phosphates, the other has 2 phosphates. And it's just a matter of if we've gone through a catabolic reaction to get to change adenosine triphosphate into adenosine diphosphate, or are we going anabolic where we're actually adding a phosphate to go from adenosine diphosphate to adenosine triphosphate. Got it? All right, let's jump into this. So just aside, right? You have adenosine triphosphate is comprised of adenine, ribose, and 3 phosphate groups, and it looks a little bit, on the next slide, you'll see what it looks like. But you'll see it represented a couple different ways. But adenine it's a a nitrogen-containing base. And you have to really kind of wrap yourself around this in terms of you have base and you have acids in the body. And ribose is a 5-carbon sugar. Adenine plus ribose equals adenosine. And then you have adenosine plus the 3 phosphate groups equals ATP. So if you kind of think this through and you kind of add it up in your head, you have a ribose, which is a 5-carbon sugar. So you have the adenine, which is a nitrogen-containing base, plus the ribose, which is a 5-carbon sugar. That gives us our adenosine. Our adenosine plus 3 phosphate groups gives us adenosine triphosphate. So there are a couple layers of complexity here when you look at this. And it's a high energy molecule. And what happens is when we break the bond and we have a catabolic reaction where you break one of the phosphate bonds, it releases energy. And it's classified as a high energy molecule due to the amount of energy stored in the chemical bonds of the 2 terminal phosphate groups. And you'll even see adenosine triphosphate, adenosine diphosphate. And you'll see this kind of go back and forth in terms of chemical reactions in the book. Let me get myself out of the way. Excuse me. And the book notes also it occurs in the cell while the muscle cells themselves store the ATP. And we talked a little bit about phosphofructokinase in another presentation, but I definitely want to take a moment here and just kind of jump into this diagram that's in the book. So you have the adenosine triphosphate. It's comprised of the adenine, the ribose, and the 3 phosphate groups, right? So you have the adenine up here, the ribose, the adenine and the ribose. That gives us our adenosine. You can see here in the purple, that's the adenine and the ribose compounded. And then if you add that through a bond here, right, you have this, and you have our 3 phosphates. So what happens is, and they denote this with these little zigzag lines, that those are high energy bonds. And the adenine, which is this up here, is a nitrogen-containing base. And then the ribose, which is the kind of green down here, is that 5-carbon sugar. And you can see the carbons in here, 1, 2, 3. As you go around, right, and you got an extra one over here. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the adenine, which is this and this, plus the ribose, give us the adenosine. The adenosine plus these 3 phosphate groups, the P in the middle, the P in the middle, the P in the middle gives us the phosphate. That is ATP. So when we talk about ATP at its core, at its base, here it is, right there, ATP. And ATP has 3 phosphates. And then when you go to adenosine diphosphate, ADP, you end up having adenosine and 2 phosphate groups. One of them broke off, and that's what gives us the energy. Now, I just want to point out, you're going to see ATP ACE. You're going to see ACE used a lot, ACE, ASE. And I'll talk more about that later on, but I just want to kind of put that in the back of your head so you remember that later on. And, for each phosphate group, it has a phosphorus atom, and it's bonded to 4 oxygen atoms, not molecules. Now keep that in mind, because that's kind of a specific thing that you'll see. I'm pretty sure you see that on a test later on in terms of oxygen atoms, not molecules, when we talk about ATP and the actual phosphate groups themselves. But what you'll notice is you have the phosphate and you have the oxygens here, and then you have the bond reaches back to the previous phosphate molecule and reaches back to the oxygen atom. And then if you look at this again, it reaches back to the oxygen atom, then it reaches back to the oxygen atom in the adenosine. So what's interesting is, even though it has 4 oxygen atoms, it's actually, one of them is shared with one of the other phosphate groups, and then eventually with the adenosine. So guys, I hate to say it, but it's going to get a little bit more complex than that. So maybe go get yourself a cup of coffee and settle in, because we're going to have a lot to talk about. That's presentation 1. All right, signing off.